Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is a very important skill that you will need to know when revising. Drum roll! And that is memorizing content. Something people always say is don't memorize, make sure you understand it. Whilst I think that is important and make sure you do that, memorizing is sort of essential in a lot of subjects, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to memorize things that help me memorize content stuff better. So keep watching and I'll share those with you now. First method that helps me memorize things is something I've mentioned a lot on my channel, and that is the use of flashcards and active recall. Active recall is a common exam technique that people use all the time to help them revise. It is a fancy word for something that's not so fancy. So flashcards are really good for testing yourself, and testing yourself is one way that's really going to help you memorize. So for something like English, the things you have to memorize are like quotes. So I had this book here of flashcards that I used to test myself, and what I did was I wrote quotes on one side and then the full analysis on the other side. That is a method of active recall because you're reading the quote and trying to actively recall what's on the other side of the flashcard. Another way you can do this that isn't so like intense revision is fill in the blanks. That can help you start to memorize things, where if you can sort of recall what the blank is, it'll sort of help you memorize what's before that word and what's after it. Usually when you're leaving blanks, those will be like the key points that you really need to memorize, and that can really help you jog your memory to memorize the rest of it. Using flashcards, I always use it to memorize definitions, key vocabulary, and also quotes if you're like trying to memorize an essay or a paragraph. The really important thing about memorizing something is repetition. Repetition is probably the most guaranteed way you're going to memorize something, and also say it out loud, because that's very different to just like reading it and then in your head being like, yeah, I think that's what it is. For some reason, it's harder for me to say it out loud and like try and recall it exactly how it's written down. So if I can say it out loud, more likely I'm going to memorize it, because now my brain's like, yes, got that. The next thing I did to memorize was object and pattern association. When you're trying to memorize like a process or like values for something, then try and associate it with something that you can picture, or maybe something that you can take into the exam with you. So, for example, this is something that I watched a YouTube video on, and I found it like the most useful thing ever to memorize the unit circle exact values for maths, like in trigonometry. So, an object you can bring into the exam is your hand. Well, I hope so, because that's what you're going to be writing with. This is where you associate different things to different parts of your body. You have angles from 0 to 90 degrees. So you have 0, 30, 45, 60, and 90. And then you want to memorize the sine values, cos values, and tan values for each of them. Take your hand and associate one of the degrees with each of your fingers. So I start here. My thumb is 0 degrees. My index finger is 30 degrees. My middle finger is 45. My ring finger's 60, and my pinky is 90. Those are the things I've associated with my hand. I look at it in the exam. There are a few things you do need to memorize, but like it's really easy to remember. The left hand side is always sine, and the right hand side is always cos. So then in the exam, I'm like, what is sine 30? So I put my 30 degree finger down, and then I read my finger. So this is, I've got one finger up, right? For every single value, when you're doing sine and cos, you want to root the number of fingers you have and then divide it by 2. And you do the same process for every single one. So that's easy to remember. You just need to memorize to root everything and divide by 2. So if I'm trying to figure out what sine 30 is, again, I put my 30 degree finger down, and sine I read from the left. So I've got one finger up for sine. So then what do? I root and divide by 2. So sine 30 is root 1 divided by 2, which is just 1 over 2, so half, like magic. And then say you want to do like cos 45. So I'll put my 45 finger down, and then and then I always remember cos is the right hand side. So on the right hand side, I have 2 fingers up, and cos 45 would then be root 2 over 2, which is the exact value. If you can associate different numbers, different values to like parts of your body, maybe it's a part of your pen or something you take in the exam, then that can help you memorize things. Another example is in biochemistry. So there's a concept of metabolism where you have anabolic reactions and catabolic reactions. I'd always get mixed up as to which one was anabolic and which one was catabolic, so I tried to come up with ways to memorize it. I take out certain things of like a word, so for example, catabolism. I'd associate it with a word, so the first 3 words of catabolism is cat, and then like the first 3 words of catastrophe is also cat, so I'd associate those 2 words together, and then when I think of a catastrophe, I think of like boom, like things are breaking up. So that's what catabolism is, breaking up. So associate like the beginning of words with another common word that you can easily remember. And that will help you memorize a lot of definitions and also distinguish between things, because a lot of the time I could memorize definition, but then in the exam I'd like second guess myself and forget which word was like relevant to what. So the easier you make things to memorize, the more certain you'll be in the exam to be able to recall it. So the third thing is probably the most common thing you'll hear of when you're trying to memorize something, and that is to make a mnemonic or some word that makes it easy to memorize. So as you can see, I'm giving a lot of examples because it's kind of hard to like explain how to do it without showing you an example. Again, with the anabolic catabolic example, I had the first 4 letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D. Obviously you'll like remember the alphabet, so this sort of just makes it easy to remember. A stands for anabolic, B stands for biosynthesis, which means building, C stands for catabolic, and D stands for degradation. Degradation, I can never say that word, which means breaking up. So if I had memorized the A, B, C, D, that just made it clear in my head what each one meant. So a mnemonic is basically just when you have a word and each letter stands for something. The one that really helped in chemistry was to do with redox reactions. In like, for example, electrochemical cells, sometimes it can be like difficult to remember, or you might get mixed up as to which one's positive and negative. So like, is the cathode positive, is the anode negative? It can all just get jumbled in your head when you have so many things to memorize. You just want to make it easy. Cat nap, so a cat taking a nap, that's really easy to remember. So it was like C, capital C, A-T, and then like capital N-A-P for like nap. So C was cathode, the capital N in nap was negative, anode positive. So then you memorize the cathode is always negative, the anode is always positive for electrochemical cells. And then for voltaic cells, it's cat-pan, where it's cathode positive, anode negative. One more example I'll give you is in biology, the stages of mitosis. Memorize something, make up a word, even if it's not like a real word, like for the stages of mitosis, the mnemonic is PMAT. So mat is like really easy to say, and you just add like a P in front of it, and voila. You've got the stages of mitosis. Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. Another one I always remembered was the stages of mass spectrometry. But what I did was I made up another word. This is not even a word, but as long as you can like sort of say it in your head, then take the first letter of each step of a process and like try and come up with a word. So my one for mass spectrometry was VIAD. VIAD is obviously not a word, but for some reason it helped me memorize it because I could say it. So V was vaporization, I ionization, A acceleration, D and D. I always remembered there were 2 D's at the end, and then to determine which one came first, I just like saw a pattern in the stages and like the words that it was in alphabetical order. So I think it was either detection and deflection. And deflection, the F came before the T in the alphabet, so I was like deflection is always first and then detection. So you can always look for patterns like alphabetical, especially, that usually can help you memorize like the order of things and like the order of processes. So that's another tip for helping you memorize different things and content. My next tip is to memorize things as a pattern of words or sentence. So for example, in chemistry, there is an equation to do with Gibbs free energy and entropy and how it relates to entropy. You don't necessarily need to memorize this because it was in your data booklet, but for some reason this helped me to memorize it, so you gotta do what you can, I guess. The equation is like delta G equals delta H minus T delta S. If you take the letters out of that formula, you have G, H, T and S together. So the first thing I always thought of when I saw TS was Taylor Swift. Who knows why, but it helped me memorize it. So if I take the letters and like come up with a sentence, then that can help you memorize it. It's always thinking of things that are easy to memorize, but you associate them with the difficult concepts. For example, I take the G first name I thought of was George, because common. So George, H, and then T and S. So my sentence was George hates Taylor Swift. If I could take the first letter of each of those, and then you have your full formula, delta G equals delta H minus T delta S. So there are some things you do have to memorize, like what's on what side and like the minus sign, but anything you can do to help you memorize that, like making these sentences, then that is useful in your revision. Another one was like for like SN1 reactions. You can use things that are like already in an order but just associate things. So for example, counting to 3, 1, 2, 3. A way to memorize like the type of reaction that SN1 is. I saw this on a Richard Thornley video and like I still remember it. What I remember for SN1 was 1, 2, 3 bang, which means 1 is for SN1, 2 is for two-step reaction, 3 is for tertiary alcohols, which is like the 3 with the little circle at the top, and then bang is just because it's a fast reaction. So 1, 2, 3 bang was a way to memorize everything about the SN1 reaction. One last example is come up with words that relate to the letter. So I've mentioned this quite a few times, but another example is memorizing the EZ isomers for organic chemistry. So Z, this is what my lecturer said in uni and I thought it was hilarious. So Z is like Z isomer, and that's where the constituent groups are on the same side. So same side, but just like with the Z in front. Okay, yeah, you get it. Don't really need to explain it. But that's how you memorize the Z, and then like the E is like E trans, so E transaction means like across, and like trans means across. So you sort of relate those things and compare it to memorize what Z and E isomers are. My last tip for memorizing things is of course a method of like making sure you understand why things are a certain way. This I found really useful in like chemistry and biology, where I'd come up with like cause and effect things that sort of help me to logically come to the answer. If I were to memorize the trends in like atomic radius, there are patterns obviously in the periodic table that will help you memorize what the trends are. So if you think about like the cause and effect, think about electrons and protons. They will repel each other because they're opposite charge. The trend in atomic radius across the periodic table has to do with effective nuclear charge. This is where across the periodic table, as the number of protons increases on that row, then effective nuclear charge will increase, making the electrons and protons come closer together because they attract each other, and then making the atomic radius smaller. So there I've used the trends that are on the periodic table to help me memorize the trends in atomic radius by using cause and effect relationships. And this is also useful in subjects like economics, where what I did in my notes was these cause and effect relationships I'd always write with arrows. So like this arrow may lead to higher this, which leads to this and this and this and this. I can't really think of an example right now, but having those cause and effect relationships are really helpful to memorize full concepts, where in economics, if I just remember that this causes this and this and this and this like sort of chain reaction thing, then that would be like a whole paragraph of an essay. So that's another really useful way to memorize content. So that's about it for this video and my random examples. They're a bit all over the place, but those are just some ways that you can use to help you memorize things. The whole gist of this video was to get the message across that if you can associate difficult concepts with easy things to remember, that can help you memorize content and things a lot faster and make it effective in your exams to recall content. So with that being said, that's everything in this video. If you like these types of videos on like how to memorize and like build these certain skills that you need in exams, then let me know in the comments and give me some suggestions on other skills you want me to walk through, and hopefully I'll have some tips for that I can share with you. And yeah, so if you want to see more of those videos, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!